Palgrave, just stay with me. There might be other things that we may have to get into. But let me bring in Emmanuel Bombande, who describes himself as a peace-building practitioner. I'd like us to talk more into the issue of terrorism now. And in recent times, we've heard National Security Minister Albert Kandapa speak to some of these issues. I would like your quick thoughts on when the National Security Minister, Albert Kandapa, says Ghana has not ruled out the threat posed by the country's youth unemployment rate. That is one. He ties that into illegal mining, aka Galamsey, illegal small-scale mining, and the terrorist threat within the sub-region. Did the National Security Minister nail the issue when he spoke to us recently?
Yes, good morning to you and to all your viewers. He absolutely did so.
Right.
You cannot separate the person in terms of what he has always stood for and his understanding for the bigger vision of nation building, state building, and the responsibility to protect, and how he conducts himself to the extent that he provides leadership when it comes to matters that pertain to security. And to that extent, therefore, he's somebody that I have admired, and he is less on the rhetoric and more on how truly consensus is built in this effort to be able to tackle this menace, this threat of terrorism. But I wanted to quickly chip in there that anytime we talk about terrorism, we must never forget that it is the escalated phase of violent extremism. And so it is the attitude of extremism that has been left to fester to the point that it becomes violent as terrorism. And to that extent, anytime we are talking about terrorism, the key word is how do we prevent the extremism from maturing to the terrorism? And that is where I always feel the conversation should lead to.
There is also a bit of a worry when the estimators put out that more than 2 million youth are without work in the country. How does this become fodder for terrorist activity in our sub-region, especially when you're talking of Galamsey? And we know about, it's a burgeoning youth base that we have in the country, and a lot of those involved in Galamsey are young people. How does that feed into the conversation?
It feeds, in my view, perfectly. There are reports, if you go to the western region, western north, in areas like Wassa, in the morning around this time, you literally see hundreds of young people just simply moving on motorbikes and tricycles into our forests and ravaging our ecosystems to the point that we are looking on so helplessly. And that for you should be the first indicator that there is a paralysis of responding to the illegal mining that we call Galamsey. Compare that to, God forbid, terrorist cells infiltrating themselves in these groups who are vulnerable and offering them alternatives, which has always been the case, that they first arrive and they are attractive to young people precisely because of the alternative livelihood they offer, to the extent that some of the young people who are desperate might not necessarily be initially attracted to these offers, but it becomes irresistible when they look at their own prospects, their own future, the type of desperate lives they are living. And so the point that we must make in this regard is what I always call the recruiting ground. So what I see is a competition between our member states or between our governments in recruiting young people into the productive sectors of economic growth. And another competitor is the growing terrorist groups who are also recruiting, but they are recruiting is for the evil and negative purposes of destruction, including human life. So who is going to win? Is it the governments who will succeed in recruiting for the productive sector, or is it the terrorist groups who will succeed?
Let me ask you, when you look at what you see now, okay, who is winning? Because we've been told that the terrorists usually are one step ahead. And they've done this in countries that now are facing some political turmoil, Burkina Faso, Mali, and all of that. They infiltrate and they get their money from the extractive sector, and they sow the seed of chaos. So are we a step ahead or are we behind? And how do we catch up?
If we look at our northern neighbors, particularly the example you gave about Burkina Faso, they are definitely a step ahead. And if the trend continues the way we have seen it in Burkina, which is now completely a red zone, it is not going to stop at those borders. And so the reality has dawned on us, and we've spoken about this several times, that terrorists are winning. And so the question is, how are we responsive enough to be able to halt this? And I want to come back to the point that you have emphasized, that if you also go to our northern neighbors, the attractive points are the illegal mining centers, because there is a lot of the economy around illegal gold mining that finances terrorism. And besides that, there are also the corridors of what you might call an ecosystem of livelihood that is more conducive to the activities of terrorists. And so Galamsey is not just about the destruction of our forests, it's also about creating the enabling environment in which terrorists can overrun this country in ways that could be shocking, precisely because of their interest in financing their illegal and terrorist activities. And we cannot pretend that this looming danger is not growing by the day. We must admit and acknowledge that it is not decreasing, it is increasing.
Let me also bring in the bit about the Accra Initiative and what your take is on that situation. Right before I go to Professor Kwesi Enning, it was birthed in 2017 as a platform to discuss and strengthen security operations among some African countries. What do you make of it so far in terms of what its gains have been, Professor, in fact, Mr. Bombandi?
First of all, let's look at the origins of the Accra Initiative. The reason I like the Accra Initiative is precisely because it differentiates itself from the earlier initiative that has been described as the G5, in which the Sahelian countries in that group of the G5 Sahel sought to do what the Accra Initiative is doing, except that the G5 had a mindset of foreign aid, and that somebody's money or somebody's military will come and fight against terrorism in their countries. And so it became a political setup, and it was bound to fail. The Accra Initiative begins with a recognition that it is a local, homegrown initiative of the member states, Ghana initiating with Togo, Cote d'Ivoire,
right,
and bringing in later on Burkina Faso. The emphasis is, one, that however little, the financing of the Accra Initiative must be, regardless of what we might call financial constraints, locally owned, locally driven. In other words, the budgets of our countries in the Accra Initiative, the moment the mindset shifts to let's look for money elsewhere, the Accra Initiative will begin to fail. Because it is not just about the budget, but it's about how that enables the Accra Initiative to be nimble, to be effective, less bureaucratic, but at the same time capable of ensuring that it is not just a military response that deals with terrorism. It is also about the investing in people, particularly in vulnerable areas, cross-border areas, that now makes people to become the allies of the military And that, for me, goes together. Both the social and economic investment in local communities, before then you even talk about the military responsiveness of our member states.
Hold for me. Let me bring in Professor Kwesi Enning, who's also been patiently standing by. Prof, a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining the conversation. Hello, Professor Enning.
Yes.
Great. Good to have you. It has been a while. It's good to have you join the conversation.
It's a great pleasure.
Great. Before we even get into the bit about the Accra Initiative, we know about the numbers, and the National Security Minister has been speaking to them. He talks about the yawning gap, when it comes to unemployment. He makes mention of the estimate that 2 million youth, more than 2 million youth, are without work in the country. And tellingly, he says the unemployment rate is of much concern to government and could exacerbate any situation in our country when it comes to the terrorist threat. What do you make of that? Did he get it, right on target? And have you seen enough in terms of what we are doing to remedy this?
No, I think he's on target, but it's too little, too late. These are figures that ought to have come either from the Ministry of Employment, the Finance Ministry, and all kinds of other ministries as an input into the analysis that gets to the Minister for National Security.
Right.
Because what my name, Emmanuel, is saying in the studio, I guess we've been saying this for more than a decade. If you go to former President Kufuor's speeches, he started raising youth unemployment as a potential security threat. And if you look or examine the explosive demographic growth and the youth board since Mr. Kufuor came to power in 2000, that is the last 22 years, probably about 5 million extra mouths have been added to the Ghanaian population. So yes, unemployment is a problem. The availability of explosives, guns, the narratives and discourses on easily accessible social media sites like Telegram are all compounding an already very bad situation.
Staying on that trajectory of unemployment, is this administration addressing it from the right ends? Paul Grave-Bwachidankwa, the government spokesperson on governance and security, is in the studio with me. He's spoken about job creation efforts and all of that. But the statistics are also there. I was just reading to him the latest statistic that between the first quarter and the second quarter of this year, about 1.1 million males have lost work. You can look at the different dynamics when it comes to, in fact, the World Bank, I believe, came out with a report saying that over 1 million Ghanaians just this year had fallen into poverty. When you look at those dynamics and juxtapose them with the Galamsey threat and how terrorists could feed into that, are we doing enough?
No, far from it. I don't think we've actually understood the complexity and the extent of the problem. And once more, I will refer to my namesake, Emmanuel. We've been talking Galamsey, we've been talking vigilantism, and the way in which these two dynamics, vigilante and Galamseyism, feeding into the unemployment and the growing unemployment figures, to create a very combustible relationship. And we've only paid lip service, to either doing something about unemployment, doing something about Galamsey, doing something about all these issues. The nexus between Galamsey and deforestation in Ghana is so devastating. In the last 2 to 3 years, the rates of deforestation in Ghana reached close to 60%. Okay, that we are cutting down our forests in our bid to mine this elusive, small, highly precious, highly valuable resource that terrorists like. And let no one tell me that, oh, this is new. In 2014, 2015, the Azuma mines near Japa were occupied by young people, or parts of it were occupied by young people from Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, and La Côte d'Ivoire, armed, and created such difficulties for the operations to go. So the link between Galamsey, the resources that are mined, and their possible linkage or their direct linkage to funding, fueling extremist violence is a very direct one. My namesake gives an example in the Western region. I will give two examples elsewhere. If you go to Bandankwanta and you drive out of town, and Bandankwanta has become like a Wild West town, so lots of cattle, lots of young people from all over the sub-region who congregate there to go to the areas around Tenga to do Galamsey. Now, the fascinating thing is that between Bandankwanta and where the mining sites are, there's a police station, okay? And over a couple of days that we spent there, the police basically just look off. The thing is that when they are going, of course, they haven't committed a crime.
Right.
When they are coming back, they haven't committed a crime. But it must be possible for our intelligence to know, because if an untrained person like me can know and can find them out, then it raises fundamental concerns about the information gathering, the analysis, and the way that analysis travels up the command chain until it gets to Mr. Dapa, who says, look, we have a problem here. And it is that failure, that inability to link what we see on the ground, combine it with other ancillary bits of information, and paint a clear picture for those who need to take the decisions to take it, that poses a mega problem. So this thing is all over the country.
Right.
And one small problem, yeah.
Speaking of it being all over the country, I'll come to you briefly on the Accra Initiative, but tied to that very point you make. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you assess the real threat that the National Security Minister speaks of in terms of these infiltrations on the back of our gold resources? And I say that even tying it to what we are seeing internally, the Kenyasi issue and Newmont, the youth of Kenyasi and Newmont. Yeah. This is not even external, this is internal.
Yeah, sure. 1 to 10, in which on that scale.
So one is the lowest, or 0 is the lowest, and 10 is the highest.
Yeah.
As a professor.
Then I will put it at around 3.5.
3.5.
Let me explain why. Yes. Because over the last 2 or 3 decades, we have become a country that provides the infrastructure for these activities to occur elsewhere.
Right.
And let's not forget, those who perpetrate these acts of violence make rational choices and make rational calculus. So if you can get the parts for the IEDs, if you can get the gold, if you can get the small arms, if you can get the explosives, why attack the source?
Right.
It doesn't make strategic sense to do so. And that is why I've given it that low mark. In terms of our being a facilitator country, then we come close to around 8, 8.5, 9.
Wow. Interesting point you make there. Very quickly, because when I come back to you next, it's with the way forward. What do you make? Has the Accra Initiative, birthed in 2017, has it achieved its goals so far for you, Prof?
No, I think the Accra Initiative is useful in the sense that there is something that when I was a kid, we used to write about very much when I started this business. The Accra Initiative is about confidence, or it is a confidence and trust building mechanism.
Okay.
In which a group of states, recognizing that their collective security is so intertwined that they cannot on their own respond to it, decide to build trust among themselves.
Right.
Share information, share the intelligence, be able to know who is who, whose telephone number, and pick it up and call. During the COVID period, between March 2020 and around March 2021, close to 200 supposedly aligned terrorist, violent extremists were arrested within this particular zone, okay, of the member states. So the Accra Initiative, and I once more agree with my name, let Ghana not make that mistake, or members of that country. When our European friends come bearing gifts, those gifts are not because they want to stabilize us.
Right.
Those gifts are because they don't want the problem to get to them. When we don't do what they want, as has happened in Mali, they will pack their goods and go away and leave us alone. So the strength of the Accra Initiative, that it is homegrown, driven by people and civil society who understand the issues and are saying, this is how collectively we can get it done. So kudos to those who are initiating the Accra Initiative, but let's keep our eye on the ball.
Okay.
Because when people come bearing gifts, those gifts are not always good.
It's interesting what Professor Enning says about people coming bearing gifts. You must look into why they are bearing those gifts and what the intent is. But just hold for me, Prof. Hold for me, Dr. Bombande. Just briefly, you'll get your final comments shortly. I want to bring in Paul Grave, who is in the studio with me. The Accra Initiative. What have been the positive takeaways so far? And moving forward, what do we do to ensure that we don't get where the National Security Minister is suggesting we could get in a minute?
So, Benjamin, the Accra Initiative was birthed as an initiative from President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo when he was ECOWAS chair. And the skyrocketing issues that had happened within the sub-region of West Africa as it relates to destabilizing democratically elected governments and then also terrorism. It's true that it's to share information. And so you'll recall at a time when the National Security Ministry, together with the Ministry of Information and Government, sought to bring the citizen engagement with see something, say something, and the launch of the 999. Clearly, it's all as a result of the Accra Initiative, and even how the Kudangu were able to arrest certain persons is also a result of that. And clearly, today, they're having the presidential meeting at AICC. Yes. Yesterday was the ministerial. I was there. Today, I'm going to be there at about 10 o'clock. The president, Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo, is going to be there together with the 7 member states.
So these challenges are being addressed. Absolutely. They're being looked at.
Absolutely.
Right.
There was actually a technical meeting last week with non-state actors, including academia. Prof was my teacher.
Right.
So it's good to have a student and a teacher on one set. It means that he taught me well. So, Prof, a very good morning to you. And so if you look at all of that, clearly you can see Ghana's efforts in having homegrown solutions.
So just to wrap, progress is being made.
Extreme progress is being made. Extreme progress. Right. And I think that it would deter a lot of terrorists from coming into the various sub-region because we are strengthening ourselves. And in strengthening ourselves, we are being united with the information. And we have actually even invited other countries. I mean, yesterday I saw the UK Defense Minister was there. The UK Foreign Affairs Minister was there. Other countries had various, other countries from beyond the continent are there. So it's a good step. And we must commend.
Talking of other countries beyond the continent, that's where Prof's bit about countries bearing gifts comes in.
Christmas came early.
Yeah, Christmas came early. Dr. Bombande, for you, as we've spoken about these and the Accra Initiative, what do you think we should do to strengthen ourselves, to prevent the threat in terms of terrorism that we see? In less than a minute, in some 40 seconds, if you can.
And my good friend and good name, Kwesi Enning, I've not seen for a long time. Let me put it this way. I want to build on one thought that he emphasized, trust building, which then makes it possible to take out those human elements that prevent cooperation.
Right.
And the Accra Initiative is moving towards that. What that means is a collective effort that recognizes everybody. And that is why my good friend, the governance advisor, I don't mind all your efforts for credibility, but don't make it look like you have fallen from the blue sky and all of a sudden things are going to be different. This is the danger of our politics. And secondly, political will is what enhances trust building. When some of our politicians, and look at the Catholic Bishops' Conference statement at the end of their plenary assembly,
right?
When politicians are the financiers of illegal mining, what are we talking about? There is a danger here that we must be dispassionate about, so that we cannot be building trust across borders, but there's no political will internally to stop the greed and the financing of illegal mining that is making our country vulnerable, not only to the destruction of the forest, but also enhancing terrorism.
Dr. Bombande, interesting way to end. Let me come to Professor Enning. You have the final word. 40 seconds, please. Hello, Prof. You may have to unmute.
All this modern technology and old men. So for me,
all right.
So for me,
yes,
it's about adaptive hybridity.
Okay.
Adaptive hybridity as an approach that creates a framework and provides a flexible, sensitive response to context specificity. Right. You know, so here we are bringing in civil societies. In other places, they will bring in chiefs and women, religious leaders. So adaptive hybridity in terms of responding to, understanding, and degrading this threat will also mean that we are bold enough to constantly appraise these approaches, not merely on a country-by-country basis, but looking at it through a regional lens.
Thank you so much, Prof. And once more, it's really refreshing to have interacted with you after so long. Professor Kwesi Enning is with the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. We also have Dr. Emmanuel Bombande, a UNDPPA Senior Mediation Advisor, former Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration. He referred to himself as a peace-building practitioner. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining the conversation.
Very much.
Thank you so much.
Great. And to wrap in the studio, we also had Palgrave Boachidankwa, government spokesperson on governance and security. Thank you, Palgrave. I see you may have had a reaction to what Dr. Bombande said. Unfortunately, time is our friend. Okay. But once more, grateful. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And that's how we wrap this end of the conversation. But there's a lot more to look forward to on the AM show right after the break. Do stay.